Good afternoon. The first item of business this afternoon is portfolio questions, and the portfolio on this occasion is education and skills. Usual reminder, members wishing to ask a supplementary should press the request to speak buttons during the relevant question. And I call question number 1, Stuart McMillan.
Thank you, President. Also to ask the Scottish Government what discussions it has had with the SQA in relation to consistency of National 4 and National 5 prelim examination papers.
Cabinet Secretary.
While prelims can be valuable preparation for final National 5 exams and a useful guide on pupil progress, they are not compulsory, and the decision on whether to set prelims rests with individual schools or colleges. As they are not a formal part of the process for awarding SQA qualifications, SQA does not have any role in the delivery of prelim exams. National 4 qualifications are made up of units, including an added value unit, with no final external examination. They are internally assessed as pass or fail and are externally quality assured by the SQA. Therefore, prelims are not commonly used at this level.
Stuart McMillan.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that reply. And the quality and the consistency of the prelim exam papers becomes important to students who find themselves in the need of an appeal, particularly through that process if they're unable to actually sit the SQA final exam. And certainly that's been the situation with one of my constituents who got an A in the prelim, but on appeal got a B after the SQA said, and I quote, the marking criteria had not been consistently applied and that the level of demand of the assessment they generated the evidence was less than the course assessment. Would the Cabinet Secretary consider it to be better for students if they all sat the same prelim exam, or one that the SQA agreed was equal to the course assessment?
Cabinet Secretary.
I thank the member for his question. I think it is worth reiterating that the SQA doesn't have any role in the delivery of our prelim exams. However, it's also worth saying that since the introduction of the, as they were then, new national qualifications back in 2013-14, apart from the temporary pandemic arrangements, prelims and any alternative evidence have not formed part of the appeals process. However, I am of the view that the appropriate evidence to inform the appeals process is obviously a matter for the new qualifications body, and it's something they should keep under review. Now, of course, the SQA does look at alternative evidence for exceptional circumstances. So those are for pupils who might have been unable to sit their exam or whose performance was impacted due to illness, for example. The SQA gives extensive guidance for centres around what constitutes valid evidence in those circumstances, including, of course, prelim evidence. The SQA also gives a range of support to centres around about understanding standards to support teachers in setting assessments and understanding the level for the learner against the national standard. But fundamentally, there is a wider programme of education reform which is currently underway, and I believe that will require to consider approaches to assessment in much more detail as part of any changes to the qualifications which might come forward. In the meantime, I would encourage Mr McMillan's constituent to discuss this matter directly with their school or local authority.
Supplementary, Martin Whitfield.
I'm very grateful, Deputy Presiding Officer. When we look at the role of the SQA in qualifications, we look back at 2022 when a generous approach was used to grading. Last year, last year exams, it was a sensitive approach to grading. And with the change coming with regard to the SQA, and actually very pertinently to the question that's been asked with regard to appeals, what approach will the SQA take this year?
Cabinet Secretary.
Thank the member for his question. Of course, this year, for the first time, we reintroduced the qualification requirements that existed prior to the pandemic, and the arrangements around the appeals process mirror those which existed prior to the pandemic. And of course, last academic year, I should say, as a member has intimated, there are a range of different measures the SQA took in relation to being sensitive to the grading approach they applied. As I understand it, they have returned to the approach that was applied prior to the pandemic, and the arrangements have returned to normal, although I'd be more than happy to write to the member directly on this issue to confirm that directly with the SQA. That is certainly my understanding of the approach they're taking this year.
Question 2, Russell Finlay.
Thank you. To ask the Scottish Government what its response is to reports of increasing violence towards teachers and students in schools.
Cabinet Secretary.
No teacher, member of staff or pupil should have to suffer abuse in our schools. Last week concluded the final stage in the Behaviour Summit with a wide range of stakeholders on behaviour in our schools. The Behaviour in Scottish Schools research was also published last week, which provides the accurate national picture in relation to behaviour in Scotland's schools. Whilst the BISA research set out that the majority of our pupils are well behaved, there has been a marked increase in disruptive behaviour since the research was last carried out in 2016. And I've been clear that it is unacceptable, and it will require a coordinated response which recognises that schools cannot manage this shift in behaviour on their own. In my statement to Parliament last week, I confirmed that a multi-year plan is in development to tackle instances of challenging behaviour, working with local authorities, trade unions and others.
Russell Finlay.
Thank you. The SNP are entirely responsible for trashing Scotland's education system. And a key reason for our children being so badly failed is that classroom discipline has collapsed. with teachers and pupils suffering unprecedented levels of violence. But just as we see with the SNP's weak justice system, those responsible know that there's no punishment and no deterrent. So what does the Education Secretary have to say to teachers who just want to do their jobs and to pupils who just want to learn in safety?
Cabinet Secretary.
I'm sorry to say to Mr Finlay that the way in which we approach our education system is very different from the way that we approach our justice system. And one of the ways that I was keen to set out in my statement to the Chamber last week is that we work with our local authorities on recognising the importance of having a national approach to supporting better behaviour in our classrooms, because I've been absolutely clear in my statement last week, Presiding Officer, the changes we have seen in behaviour over the course of since 2016 when the research was last carried out are unacceptable. They're unacceptable for our teachers and they're unacceptable for our young people. I set out a 5-point plan to Parliament last week to tackle behaviour in Scotland School. I recognise very much so the challenges that exist here. But the point I was making to the member in my initial response is that schools cannot do this on their own. We need a coordinated response that looks to engage, for example, our health professionals in speech and language provision. We heard contributions from other members to that point last week, but also that helps to support consistency in relation to how behaviour management policies are applied. That's actually a matter for our teachers, who I trust to deliver behaviour management policies in our schools.
A number of supplementaries. Let's try to get them all in. First, Bill Kent.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. Cabinet Secretary, last week's BISSR highlighted that poverty can have a clear impact on behaviour at secondary level. Does the Cabinet Secretary share my concern that the extension of sanctions regime announced by the Chancellor last week and the continued commitment of the Westminster parties to austerity could have a knock-on impact of how some of the most vulnerable young people fare at school?
Cabinet Secretary.
I think the member is absolutely right, and having taught hungry children, I know exactly how poverty interacts with our education system. It is a damning indictment, I think, on the way in which the UK Government has organised its approach to supporting some of our most vulnerable, and it is impacting in our classrooms. We saw that bear out in the PISA evidence published. Well, I hear chuntering from the Conservative benches, Presiding Officer, but I have to say the actions taken by their government in Westminster is harming the outcomes of our young people in schools in Scotland today. The Government is taking action that we can to protect our young people from poverty. That's why we are investing in the game-changing Scottish Child Payment as part of a package of measures which mean an estimated 90,000 fewer children will live in poverty in Scotland this year. And we also have the most generous free school meals provision, of course, in the UK. That's something that I wish other parts of the UK would echo, and I think that support has been pivotal to some of the progress we have seen in relation to our young people. But those are the SNP's values in action, Presiding Officer. They could not be starker, of course, in contrast to the actions of a Tory government driving more and more of our children into poverty.
Pam Duncan-Glancy.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. And the Cabinet Secretary, of course, mentioned PISA. The results this week really must be a wake-up call. The crisis in behaviour in schools is impacting attainment, causing standards to drop, and it's no longer just about young people feeling safe, but it's about the future of our entire education system. And the Government said that they needed to listen before they acted, and pupils, teachers and parents have spoken. Yet the Government response is lacking. It blamed teachers, it abandoned pupils and it sidelined parents. So can I ask the Cabinet Secretary, when does she intend to get serious about this issue, show the leadership our education needs and come back to this chamber with specific actions to further address behaviour in schools?
Cabinet Secretary.
I have to say to the member, I'm somewhat disappointed by her response. This isn't going to take one parliamentary statement to solve. We need parents to be part of the solution, which is exactly why I've been engaging with the National Parents Forum on this very issue only last week. She talks about engagement with the profession. I met with our trade unions yesterday. We had a good discussion around about some of the action collectively we can take together. I have to say to the member, the Government cannot do this on our own, but I accept my responsibility as Cabinet Secretary in setting out a national action plan. I very much hope the member will work with me to that end, recognising that we will need to have a coordinated response to the challenges presented, yes, in relation to behaviour, but actually I think she's right in relation to her point on PISA. We need a coordinated response that recognises the challenge and does not accept this as the new normal in our education system.
Thank you. Can we listen to the questions and indeed the answers? I now call Beatrice Wishart.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. This week I met with a head teacher with over 20 years teaching experience across different areas of Scotland. She told me about the violence and abuse from pupils and parents and its impact on other pupils and all levels of staffing. She spoke of the enormous workload, budget cuts, low staff morale, unable to meet children's needs and feeling helpless in a system she says is broken, and she's now resigned. The Scottish Government's response is more training for teachers. Does the Education Secretary really think that a teacher of that experience just needs more training?
Cabinet Secretary.
I don't know if Beatrice Wishart was actually in the chamber last week when I gave my response to the BISA research. That wasn't my response at all. We did provide additional funding for those who work in learning support because, of course, the BISA research talked about our learning support assistants asking for that additionality through that independent research. So I do want to point to that. But look, this isn't just about staff training. This is about a societal shift. And it isn't just happening in our schools post-COVID. There are challenges playing out in all of our communities and all of our constituencies that we are all very well aware of in relation to antisocial behaviour, for example, on some of our buses, in relation to some of the challenges we face in our justice network. So this isn't just about school. We should be mindful of societal shifts since the pandemic. We are trying to work with our local authority partners, though, in relation to the changes we've seen in terms of our young people and their behaviour. She spoke about some of the violence. I think some of the most shocking parts of the BISA research that published last week were some of the challenges in some of our youngest children. We know, for example, the transition for some of our youngest from the early years into primary has been extremely traumatic. These are the young people who were out of formal education during national lockdowns. They were also out of education during industrial action. So their education was disrupted. And to Ms Duncan Glancy's point, I think some of the impact is now playing out in relation to PISA. We need a holistic response to that. I'm very sorry, I have to say, to hear about the story that Ms Wishart has outlined today about the professional who's left the teaching profession. We need more people who work in Scotland's schools to help support our young people. And I commit to Parliament to come back next week to give a fuller update in relation to the PISA response.
Thank you. Question 3, Polly McNeill.
To ask the Scottish Government what work it's doing in schools to educate boys to prevent violence against women and girls.
Cabinet Secretary.
The Scottish Government is clear that harassment or abuse in any form, whether in the workplace, schools or in the home or in society, is completely reprehensible and must stop. The conduct and behaviour of perpetrators must change if we are to end harassment and abuse. I am concerned by the findings of the behaviour in Scottish schools research, echoed, of course, by surveys undertaken by some of our teaching unions about rises in misogyny in our schools. The Government will shortly publish a national framework for schools on preventing and responding to gender-based violence. This will help to ensure consistent messages on sexual harassment and gender-based violence for everyone working with children and young people. And it will also support our commitment to eliminate all forms of violence against women and girls.
Polly McNeill.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer, as she says that misogyny is unfortunately still rife in our schools and many young women still report sexual harassment at school at an alarming level. Scottish Labour's consultation on violence against women and girls found that developing educational resources on gender-based violence for all boys and young men in Scotland should be a key priority if we have to effectively tackle violence against women and girls. Will the Scottish Government commit to introducing bespoke workshops that specifically teach boys and young men about healthy relationships and interactions with girls and young women? And will they consider rolling them across the whole curriculum?
Cabinet Secretary.
I thank Polly McNeill for her question. I think she raises a really important point. I intimated in my initial response that we will be publishing very shortly the gender-based violence framework that will set out the national approach. I think the proposal she has brought to the Chamber today is an interesting one. I commit to working with her, I think, on this matter, recognising that support in our schools, I think, will be needed, absolutely, on the front line, to tackle some of the challenges that we see borne out in the BISA research. But also, a number of our teaching unions have carried out some really detailed research on this issue. It doesn't just affect female pupils, I should say, it affects female members of staff. And our teaching population is majority female, so we need to be mindful of the shifts that are happening in relation to some of the trends that are playing out. Anecdotally, we have also seen the rise of individuals such as Andrew Tate, and I think some of that is impacting on behaviour in our schools. So we absolutely need a coordinated approach. That's what the framework will set out in more detail. And I will take Ms McNeill's idea away from today's portfolio questions and speak to officials about whether or not we might be able to support the approach she has outlined.
Okay, there's a lot of interest in supplementaries. I'm going to try and get them all in, but they will need to be questions. Spare us the preambles, and the responses will need to be relatively brief too. First, Jim Fairley.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. Does the Cabinet Secretary agree with me that while we work to educate boys in schools is very important, there are programmes like Bold Girls Ken in my constituency who are working across campuses to tackle gender-based violence through an understanding of what consent means, but also that this is a much wider societal issue which needs society-wide solutions, and in particular from men taking their responsibility and seriously calling out male behaviours which leads to violence against women and girls.
I do agree with the member and I welcome his contribution. It's absolutely vital that men call out instances when they see misogyny and male behaviours which could lead to violence against women and girls. I spoke in my statement, I think, last week about our teachers highlighting the toxic impact of certain social media figures in influencing young boys and promoting intolerance of women. And I think all of us in the Chamber would be concerned by that. And while education has absolutely a central part to play in teaching our children and young people about gender equality, much like behaviour, it can't do so in isolation. We need wider society to play its part in supporting our efforts to eradicate violence against women and girls.
Hugh Webber.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Does the Cabinet Secretary agree with me and the Zero Tolerance charity that greater bureaucracy or government directives or indeed national frameworks are not what's required to tackle this issue, but action?
Cabinet Secretary.
Thank the member for her question. I've seen some of the response from Zero Tolerance to the BISSER research, and actually I'd be very keen to engage with them directly on this issue. I think it's important to say that through the action plan we are working with various organisations, and I want to work with Zero Tolerance on this matter to ensure that we get this right. She talks about action, of course. I think it's worth remembering, and I did put this on the record last week in the statement to Parliament, the government doesn't directly run our schools, so there are responsibilities here for our local authorities, but we do need to see consistency in responding to this issue. I actually think that's why the framework is quite helpful. But to Ms McNeill's point, we do need to see practical action, so I'm more than happy to engage with Education Scotland on how we might be able to deliver that in our schools where we make the difference.
Ben McPherson.
Building on what the Cabinet Secretary said already, does the Government agree with me that as well as men speaking with boys about gender justice and gender-based violence in school settings and teachers speaking in school settings, we need all men who are in positions of leadership engaging with boys, whether that's in youth clubs or in sports clubs, to engage on this issue so that together we can tackle gender-based violence in Scotland?
Cabinet Secretary.
I think the member makes a very important point. As I mentioned in my previous answer, we need that societal approach to eradicating violence against women and girls, and public support from men in positions of power, and I should say, Presiding Officer, positions of public life, are really important. I know the First Minister has taken a key role in tackling the problem of toxic masculinity, and I hope that every man in this chamber would look to do the same.
And Stephen Kerr.
I wonder what we're teaching our boys. When you look at the research on the NAS-UWT union, it says almost a fifth of female teachers in Scotland's schools are being assaulted several times a week by pupils. What are we teaching our boys when their behaviour in respect to female teachers meets with no sanctions and no consequences? That's not right, is it?
Cabinet Secretary.
I think the member makes an important point. Actually, we talked yesterday in my meeting with the trade unions around about having that consistent approach to behaviour that's not acceptable, and I think we need to set that out at national level. The member is absolutely correct to talk about consequences. That was a key theme that came from the BISSER research. What we also saw in the BISSER research, I should say, Presiding Officer, are various approaches in relation to the implementation of behaviour management policies, and a tension between promoting positive behaviour and actually where we need to see consequences. And I accept as a former teacher that we need a role for responsibilities in our classroom. I think he's absolutely correct to highlight the link here with misogyny too. As I intimated in my response to previous members, we will set out the framework in that respect in the coming weeks, I hope before the end of the year. But this challenge is not going away. We need to have more of a balance in relation to behaviour in our schools. And I hope the member hears from me my commitment to come back in relation to that national plan to set out exactly our expectations at a national level.
Question 4, Keith Brown.
To ask the Scottish Government what assessment it has carried out regarding any impact of UK immigration policies on universities in Scotland.
Mr Graham Day.
Now, Officer, the UK Government's latest attacks on immigration could have a devastating impact on our universities and risks the economic, social and cultural contribution which international students make, not only to campuses but to Scotland. We want to attract more people to live, work and study here, not fewer. And the simple fact is that with independence we could devise a principled approach to migration that delivers for our economy, our public services and our universities. Last month we published plans for a new Scottish corrections visa post-independence which would allow international students to live and work in Scotland for 5 years after their studies and could lead to Scottish citizenship, an offering in line with Scotland's values and one which could also meet our economic needs.
Keith Brown.
Can I thank the Minister for his answer? At a recent meeting with the University of Stirling, which is based in my constituency, one of the issues discussed was the potential impact of the policy recently introduced by the UK Government, which restricts many international students from bringing their dependents. There are real concerns that without the ability to bring their families, many overseas students will choose to go elsewhere. Does the Minister agree with me that hostile immigration policies have the ability to harm the international standing of our universities, and that the UK Government should devolve immigration powers to the Scottish Parliament, notwithstanding the complete silence in the MSP benches from the Tories in this Parliament, to ensure that Scotland remains an open and welcoming destination for international students, where their contribution to the economy and the social and cultural diversity of our country is very much welcomed?
Minister.
Presiding Officer, the UK Government's latest doubling down on the hostile environment means that not only could we see fewer international students studying in Scotland, it could also make it harder for our universities to attract international staff. The changes relating to dependence are particularly pernicious. Evidence shows that the ability to bring family members to Scotland encourages migrants to stay long-term, and the additional controls mean that families risk being torn apart by the most restrictive family reunion policy of any high-income country in the world. This approach runs contrary to the one we should have, that of welcoming people making Scotland their home, choosing to live, work or study here.
And supplementary, Liam Kerr.
In discussing the student make-up of universities, data from the Higher Education Statistics Agency shows the number of Scottish students studying in England has risen by about 11%. Harriet Watt figures suggest retaining those 2,000 students would keep about £19 million in Scotland. So what is the Scottish Government doing to review its arbitrary cap on Scottish students attending our universities?
Minister.
Presiding Officer, what an act of deflection that was. I mean, really, seriously, we're dealing with an issue that is actively impacting on our students through the immigration policies of the UK Government, and I'll take no lectures for the Tory party on this.
Question 5, Alexander Burnett.
To ask the Scottish Government what its response is to the reports of Aberdeenshire secondary school parent councils calling for changes to the teacher induction scheme.
Cabinet Secretary.
We recognise there is a challenge around the recruitment of teachers in certain areas of Scotland and in certain subjects. The Government is considering what immediate improvements can be made to the allocation of probationers on the teacher induction scheme who will take up placements in August 2024, particularly those who have opted for the preference waiver scheme. The Strategic Board for Teacher Education is also undertaking work to ensure that we have the right number of teachers in the right places with the right expertise. With regard to the North East in particular, I met with Aberdeenshire councillors and the Director of Education yesterday to discuss their concerns about recruitment and probationer allocation in the North East.
Alexander Burnett.
I'm glad the Cabinet Secretary found the time to meet with Aberdeenshire Council yesterday, and they look forward to her returning in the new year to further explore solutions and meet with some of the parents who wrote. Now, Aberdeenshire only received 12 of the 66 secondary probationary teachers they requested and remain chronically short. Local authorities are now worried about the teacher census and that they will be unfairly penalised for staff shortages. So will the Cabinet Secretary answer what she wouldn't answer yesterday and confirm that local authorities won't be punished for her poor performance?
Cabinet Secretary.
I thank the member for his question. I think he suggested that Aberdeenshire had been allocated 12 probationers. As far as I understand it, it was 18. However, I will check that with my officials. There were a number of key areas, of course, that came from the meeting yesterday, which I did find extremely helpful in relation to the challenges that Aberdeenshire in particular is facing. One of the challenges, of course, the member will accept that some probationers are not ticking the box to choose Aberdeenshire Council as a local authority. That is part of the challenge that we face post-COVID, because we know that probationer teachers are now less likely to move to rural parts of Scotland than they were before the pandemic. But there are a number of short-term actions that we will be taking on the back of yesterday's meeting, which of course include reviewing the TIS approach in a short-term approach that will look at how we can introduce measures to ensure that more people who do tick the preference waiver box are sent to more rural locations like Aberdeenshire. We're also going to engage directly with the GTCS on this, who of course administer the TIS scheme, and to that end in the meeting with, well, I can hear the member chuntering, but if the member would respect, I am trying to answer his question.
Minister, could you resume your seat? Mr Burnett, you've asked the question. You're going to listen to the response and not heckle all the way through it, but Minister, you are going to have to conclude your response. Cabinet Secretary.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'm sure the Conservatives want to support good behaviour in the Chamber, given their views on that matter. The Scottish Government, of course, will look to work with the GTCS, and that's why in my meeting with Aberdeenshire Council I said to the elected members and the Director of Education I will visit Aberdeenshire in the new year, along with the Chief Executive of the GTCS, to work with them on this challenge.
Question 6, Paul Sweet.
To ask the Scottish Government what steps it is taking to support student mental health and wellbeing.
Mr Graham Day.
Over 4 academic years from 1920 to 22-23, as part of our programme for government commitment, we supported institutions to introduce more than 80 additional counsellors to help their students, with a total investment of almost £60 million. That commitment was successfully delivered and concluded. In addition, for this academic year, the Scottish Government confirmed a further stand-alone investment of £3.21 million to support the important and necessary transition to a future position where student mental health and well-being is fully embedded as a shared commitment between institutions, Scottish Government, NHS Scotland and other partners, which meets student needs and integrates with local services.
Paul Sweeney.
Aspiration and money might be a fine thing, but research from the Mental Health Foundation found that 64% of college students in Scotland had low mental well-being, and despite that the government have moved the goalposts on their student mental health plan time and time again. The working group last met in December, then the plan was to be published in the spring. It was then still being developed in May, then delayed again in June, and then to be published at some point after the mental health strategy delivery plans, but there is still no sign of it. Do the Scottish Government still plan to deliver a student mental health plan, and if so, when?
Minister. Presiding Officer, we will be consulting with members of the Student Mental Health and Wellbeing Working Group on the Student Mental Health Plan very shortly.
Thank you. And a very brief supplementary, Ros McCall.
In a recent Mental Health Foundation Scotland survey, 54% of college students reported to have moderately severe or severe symptoms of depression, and in another survey found 92% of students experienced loneliness at some point during their time at Scottish universities. So with more than half of Scottish students reported to have experienced depression and over 9 in 10 experienced loneliness, does the Minister accept that the steps being taken by the Scottish Government to support student mental health and wellbeing are failing?
Minister.
I don't accept that at all, and I think that's a misrepresentation of the situation. I mean, there is a societal problem in this space. It's not simply characterised in universities and colleges, but what we are doing and what we have been doing is working very closely with the institutions to develop this plan, which we will consult upon very shortly, because it's important that where students do present with significant issues, there are clear pathways to allow them to access centralised mental health services, and that's what we're working towards.
Thank you, Minister. Question 7 was not lodged. Question 8 is withdrawn. Therefore, that concludes portfolio questions on education and skills. There will be a brief pause before we move to the next item of business to allow front benches to change.